They fell in love with the house the way people fall in love with old things. Not despite the imperfections, but partly because of them. The sloped kitchen floor. The window in the master bedroom that rattled when the wind came from the east. The wallpaper in the dining room that someone had chosen with great confidence in what appeared to be 1987, and which Claire and Owen had agreed, on the drive home from the viewing, to keep ironically, and then ended up genuinely not minding. It was a house that had been lived in by people who had made their peace with it, and that peace had soaked into the walls, and Claire felt it the moment she stepped inside. The room at the end of the upstairs hallway was the only thing that gave the estate agent any visible discomfort. She mentioned it briskly and moved on. Old house, wood swells in the damp, probably just needs the frame planed down. Absolutely nothing to worry about. Shall we look at the garden? They looked at the garden. They made an offer that evening. The first weeks were the particular chaos of moving. Boxes in the wrong rooms, meals eaten standing up, the irrational happiness of assembling flat-pack furniture together at 11 at night with a bottle of wine open on the floor. They painted the bedroom. They found a farmer's market 2 streets over. Owen adopted a dog from the rescue centre near his office, a quiet and serious-faced greyhound named Pepper, who took to the house immediately and spent her first week methodically investigating every corner of every room with the focused energy of a new employee learning the building. Every corner except one. The hallway outside the room at the end was the boundary. She'd stop at the same spot every time, 4 feet from the door, maybe 5, and sit down and wait, patient and immovable, until Claire or Owen called her away. They noticed it the way you notice a thing that has a mundane explanation you simply haven't found yet. And then they stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing anything that becomes part of the daily texture of a place. They tried the door twice in the first week. The handle turned, the latch released, but the door held fast in its frame, as if the house itself were bracing against it. Owen got a flathead screwdriver and worked the edges. Nothing. Claire called a carpenter recommended by their neighbour, who came, pushed on the door 3 times in different places, and said it was the most thoroughly stuck door he'd seen in 30 years. Probably needed the whole frame replaced. He could do it in the spring if they wanted, but honestly, if nothing was in there they needed, it was probably easiest to leave it. They left it. Owen put a bookshelf in front of it, a practical double function, he said. Storage and the aesthetic improvement of covering what was admittedly a fairly ugly door. And by the end of the 2nd month, Claire had stopped registering it as a door at all. It was just where the bookshelf was. It was Claire who noticed the cold first. Not a dramatic cold, not the sudden drop that features in the kind of stories her mother used to tell her, specifically to prevent her from sleeping. Just a consistent, reliable 2 or 3 degrees of difference in the air at that end of the hallway. She started wearing socks more. She stopped hanging around near the bookshelf. She would have been hard-pressed to say exactly when she began routing herself around the end of the hallway without approaching it, but at some point she had, and it had started to feel like the most natural thing in the world. Owen started sleepwalking in November. Mildly at first. She'd find him on the couch in the morning, blinking and confused, a little embarrassed. She found him in the kitchen twice, once standing at the counter and once sitting at the table with his hands flat on the surface, as if he'd been waiting for something. She called his GP, who said stress was the most common trigger, and asked about work. Work was fine, Owen said. Everything was fine. The GP recommended a sleep study if it continued. It continued. The 3rd week of November, she woke at 2:30 in the morning to find his side of the bed empty. She searched the house the way she'd started doing, couch first, then kitchen, then bathroom, and found him standing in front of the bookshelf at the end of the hallway, standing very close to it, close enough that his forehead was almost touching the spine of the book at eye level. His eyes were open. He didn't respond when she said his name. She took his arm gently and walked him back to bed, and he lay down without waking and was asleep before she'd pulled the duvet over him. In the morning, he remembered nothing. He seemed fine. He made her coffee and burned the toast and apologized for the toast, and everything was entirely normal. She told herself it was the stress, the new house, the new routines, the disruption of it all settling into his sleep. She told herself this with some success for about a week, and then Pepper disappeared. The doors were all locked. She checked every window. She walked the garden twice and the street 3 times, calling Pepper's name in the dark, feeling the particular anguish of calling for something that doesn't answer. Owen helped her make posters. They put them in every shop window on the high street. Nobody called. There was simply no Pepper, in a house with no way out for a dog, and then there was no explanation for that. And Claire put Pepper's bowl in the cupboard because she couldn't look at it, and they didn't talk about it after the first week, because there was nothing useful to say. She noticed the smell for the first time the night after Pepper disappeared. Standing in the hallway, she thought she caught something from the gap under the bookshelf, under the door behind it. Faint. Not rot, not damp, not the old house smell she'd long since stopped noticing. Something almost familiar that she couldn't name, like a word she knew in a language she'd half forgotten. She stood there for a moment, trying to place it, and then went to bed, and by morning had convinced herself it was the drains. December brought the sounds. Not the sounds she'd braced for. No scratching, no banging, nothing so unambiguous as that. More like the specific acoustic signature of a room being occupied. A weight shifting on a floorboard. The particular sound of something being set down with care. She heard it 3 nights in a row before she acknowledged to herself that she was hearing it. And another 3 nights after that before she mentioned it to Owen, choosing a Saturday morning over coffee when the daylight made everything feel more manageable. Owen listened. He nodded at the right moments, and then he said, in a voice that was warm and reasonable and subtly, almost imperceptibly final, "It's an old house, love. They make noise." He picked up his coffee. He turned to the window. The conversation was over in a way that had nothing to do with rudeness and everything to do with a door being closed. Claire looked at the back of his head and felt something she couldn't name, and said nothing. She started sleeping badly in January. Not the dramatic insomnia of a person in crisis, just a persistent shallowness to her sleep, a sense of hovering just below the surface of it without ever going deep. She'd lie awake for an hour in the dark, listening to Owen breathe and to the house settling around them. And she'd think about the room, and then make herself think about something else, and then think about the room again. The dream began in the 2nd week of January and came back every night without variation. She was in a room she didn't recognize. Bare walls, no windows, a quality of light she couldn't source because it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. There was writing on the walls. She could see it clearly enough to know it was there, but every time she tried to focus on it, her eyes slid away. The way eyes slide away from something too bright or too wrong to hold. She'd wake with the feeling of having almost understood something enormous, something that would explain a great many things, and the feeling would dissolve within seconds of waking, the way dreams do, leaving only the residue of its shape. It was a Wednesday morning in late January, early still, grey light coming through the bedroom curtain. She got up before Owen and went to the bathroom, and on her way back down the hallway, she stopped. The bookshelf stood as it always stood, but the gap between its base and the floor, the gap that corresponded to the gap under the door behind it, held a thin line of light. Not the cold blue of early morning coming through a crack somewhere. Warmer than that. The quality of afternoon light through a south-facing window. At 6:30 in the morning. In a room with no exterior wall. She stood in the hallway for a long time. The line of light didn't waver, it didn't flicker. It simply was. Patient and warm and completely impossible. And after a while, she went downstairs and made coffee. And when Owen came down 20 minutes later, she didn't tell him. She had already started understanding, without articulating it to herself, that there were things she and Owen were no longer telling each other. It had happened so gradually, she couldn't have said when it began. They were still warm with each other, still functional, still recognizably themselves. But there was a subject they were moving around with a coordination that had never been discussed, and both of them knew it, and neither of them named it.
Anna came to stay for a weekend in February. Claire's oldest friend, the kind of friend who takes up space in a house immediately and beneficially, filling rooms with noise and opinions and the smell of whatever she'd been cooking. She arrived Friday evening with wine and strong views about a film she'd seen on the train, and Claire felt, for the first time in weeks, like herself. Saturday morning, Anna came downstairs to find Claire at the kitchen table and Owen already gone. A work thing, he'd said. Half day. He'd be back by 2. Anna made herself at home in the kitchen the way she always did, and then paused in the doorway and looked down the hallway. "What's down there?" she asked. "Behind the bookshelf." Claire explained. The door. The carpenter. The decision to leave it. Anna listened and then said she wanted to see it, the way Anna always wanted to see everything. And Claire followed her down the hallway and watched her friend stand in front of the bookshelf and study the gap at its base. "There's light coming from under there," Anna said. "I know." "Claire, I know." Anna was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was deciding how to say something. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. Not the door, the everything. Claire could hear the everything in the question. "We're fine," Claire said. "It's an old house." Anna looked at her for a long moment, and then looked back at the door, and didn't say anything else about it for the rest of the weekend. But Sunday morning, before she left, she took Claire's hands at the kitchen table and said, very quietly and very directly, that she wanted Claire to call her. Any time. For any reason. That she didn't need a reason. Claire said she would. She meant it when she said it. Margaret Hale from number 42 had been on Aldrin Street for 30 years and had the particular confidence of someone who had outlasted several sets of neighbours and fully expected to outlast several more. She came with a jar of marmalade. Her own. She made it every February. The whole street got a jar. And accepted the offer of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with the ease of someone who had sat at many kitchen tables on this street and knew the rhythm of it. They talked about the street, about the family who'd moved in at number 38, about the planning application for the new development at the end of the road that Margaret considered an affront. And then, in the space between one topic and the next, Margaret said, "The Holloways had that room too, of course." "The previous owners?" "And the family before them. The Ashworths." Margaret wrapped both hands around her mug. "The Ashworths were here when we moved in. Nice family."
They left rather suddenly in the end. What do you mean? They had the room too? Margaret set her mug down. Something moved across her face that Claire couldn't quite read. I shouldn't have brought it up, she said, and her voice had changed. Not cold, not unkind, but careful in a way it hadn't been a moment ago. Old house business. Nothing to do with you. She finished her tea. She left the marmalade. She was at the gate before Claire reached the front step and walked quickly for a woman of 71, and didn't look back. She started paying attention to Owen in March in a way that shamed her slightly because it felt like surveillance. She'd watch him at dinner, watch him when he thought she wasn't watching. He was fine. He was warm and present and made her laugh and remembered to buy the specific coffee she liked even though he preferred a different brand. He was Owen. He was entirely Owen. Except that once or twice a week she'd come home to find him sitting upstairs, not doing anything, not reading, not on his phone, just sitting in the hallway chair they'd put there because they'd needed somewhere to put it, the one that faced the bookshelf. She'd ask if he was all right, and he'd look up with the slightly confused expression of someone returning from a long way away and say yes. Fine, sorry, he must have zoned out. He'd get up and come downstairs and be entirely himself for the rest of the evening. She stopped mentioning it. He never volunteered an explanation. The night she found him sitting there at 2 a.m. was the night she decided. He wasn't asleep this time. He was awake, sitting with his back straight and his hands on his knees, looking at the bookshelf with an expression she had never seen on his face in 7 years. Not frightened, not distressed, not anything she had a word for. She said his name. He turned to look at her, and the expression cleared immediately, and he said he couldn't sleep and had come to get some water and must have sat down for a moment. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them looked at the bookshelf. She went downstairs and got the toolbox. Fear channeled into action. She moved the books off the shelves first, stacking them in the hallway. Owen came down the stairs while she was shifting the bookshelf itself and stood watching her without speaking. She didn't look at him. When the bookshelf was clear of the door, she picked up the hammer and the flathead screwdriver and started working the frame the way the carpenter had shown her, without knowing he was showing her. And Owen stood at the top of the stairs and watched, and the house was very quiet. The cold was significant now. Not the 2 or 3 degrees of difference she'd normalized in the autumn, but something with weight to it, pressing against her face and hands as she worked. The smell from under the door was stronger. Still not rot. Still almost familiar. She kept working. Not dramatic, just final. It opened on the 3rd attempt at the upper hinge, swinging inward with the slow inevitability of something that had been waiting rather than stuck. No sound. No rush of air. Just the door opening, and the room beyond it, and the light. The room was empty. Bare boards, bare walls, a ceiling sloped slightly toward the back of the house. No furniture. No window. Just a blank wall where a window might have been expected. And yet the light was there, sourceless and warm, the same quality she'd seen under the door for weeks. It simply lived in the room the way light lives in a room on a clear afternoon, except that outside the February sky was a flat and uniform gray. The writing covered every surface, not carved, not painted, written, in something dark she didn't look at too closely, in a hand so small and dense that the walls appeared from a distance to be textured. She stepped closer. Dates. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Columns and rows of dates running from the skirting board to the ceiling, across the ceiling itself, continuing on every wall without interruption. Some of them were clearly old,
The format different, the style of notation unfamiliar. Others were recent. She recognized the format immediately. She found the day they moved in, the day they signed the contracts, the day Owen found Pepper at the rescue center and sent her a photo from the car park because he was too excited to wait until he got home. The day Pepper disappeared. Each one there, accounted for, written in the same small, careful hand as everything else around it. She looked for her birthday. Found it. Found Owen's. Found the day they'd met, a Tuesday in October 9 years ago that she hadn't thought about in months, and which was written on the wall of this room in a house she hadn't lived in yet. She turned slowly. Behind her, Owen stood in the doorway. He was looking at the walls with that expression she had no word for, and he wasn't surprised. He wasn't surprised at all. She looked at his face and understood that he had known, not everything, not consciously, but in the way the body knows things before the mind agrees to know them, that this was here, that this had always been here, that whatever had been sitting with him in the hallway on all those quiet nights had been showing him, in whatever language it used, that this room was here and was occupied and was keeping its record, and that it was fine. It was fine. Everything was fine. She found it near the center of the wall directly opposite the door, written no differently than any other date around it, no larger, no darker, no special emphasis. Tomorrow's date. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked at the date above it, which was yesterday, and the date above that, which was the day before, and she understood that the wall was not a prediction. It was a record. It had always been a record. And tomorrow's date was already written because tomorrow was already known, the way yesterday was known, the way the day they signed the contracts was known, the way the Tuesday in October 9 years ago when she and Owen met in a bar neither of them usually went to was already known and already written in this room, in this house, on this street, that they had fallen in love with so immediately and so completely. She looked at the date written on the wall. She looked at Owen in the doorway. She looked back at the date. Tomorrow was the day they opened the room. It was already written. It had always been written. They had never been choosing when to open it. They had only been arriving.